Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another live stream for the Survive podcast. Today I'm joined by Edward Dodge. He is the author of the book titled History of the Goddess from the Ice Age to the Bible. Today's topic is about panpsychism versus scientific materialism versus traditional dualism. So welcome back to the podcast, Ed Dodge.
Hey, great, Jacob. It's great to be here, and thanks. It's this will be a little bit different tonight. It's great to be back, and tonight I want to talk just a little modern philosophy, not anything from the ancient world. I want to talk about kind of a little
Sure.
philosophical approach today, and it really relates to the way people digest this material about Asherah and these goddesses in the Bible, because there's a lot of different views, and so, and I've learned a
Right.
lot from listening to people, their responses to my material and their responses to my approach to my material. That's really informed me about where things are at philosophically. So we're going to get to panpsychism, which is this modern philosophy that talks about matter and consciousness. But first, I want to talk about kind of truth and like the notion of who has authority over truth with like a capital T, like in society, because like we live in my opinion, a very mysterious world. But we give authority to people to speak to how things really are, and traditionally, so we've got competing authorities these days in our society. The old authority, the traditional authority, was the Orthodox authority. The religious Orthodox. So in the West, we're talking about Christianity, but any religious orthodoxy really, or just religious orthodoxy in general. And up until the Enlightenment, their authority wasn't challenged. And in the West, for the last 1,500 years, no one was challenging the authority of Christianity, of the priesthood, of the Bible, of the there was a fight between Protestants and the Catholics, but there wasn't a dispute over the truth of Jesus and the truth of God. Then we get into the Enlightenment. Scientific thinking comes along in the early 1600s. We get Descartes, is one of the early people who comes up, points out very importantly that the only thing we know for sure in this very uncertain world is that of consciousness. Is that I think, therefore I am. And that is the only thing you can say that for absolute certain. That for you can't really say. I mean, you might be. It's entirely possible that everything you're experiencing right now is a total hallucination. That you are a lunatic locked up in a psycho ward, fully medicated on hallucinogenic drugs, and everything you're experiencing right now is a total fantasy. Or you might be a brain in a jar. Or you're plugged into the matrix. Who knows? The point is, the only thing you know for certain is that you're having this experience you're having right now, is that you think. The fact that you're thinking, the fact that you're having a conscious experience is the only absolute certainty we have in life. And so this presents a conundrum for the scientists. So as science comes along, and the idea that it starts with Galileo, the idea that we're going to look at world in a purely materialistic forms, and we are going to deduce everything down to math and physics. Ultimately it comes to the idea that the whole world is a material world, and we can deduce everything to math and physics. And that so this begins 400 years ago, but all the early Enlightenment thinkers were all still religious, and so they're all still thinking in their type of science was to unlock the mysteries of God's creation. But coming from the French Revolution in 1800 and then going forward for the last 200 years, we've had the idea that no, it's just a materialist world altogether, and there is no spiritual world, and there is no God, there is no soul, and ultimately they believe there is no free will. It's just a purely material world. And so this idea gets its exponent in Karl Marx. Marx is a staunch materialist. So is Mao. All the communist movements are all staunch materialists. And so they say, there is no spiritual world. They're hostile to religion and spirituality, and they want to push them aside. And so what we end up with in the West is, a split between religious orthodoxy on one hand and the secular world on the other hand. In the secular world, they view science as the authority. And so truth with a capital T is that which can be proven by science. And they will not accept any answers that are not reducible to a scientific experiment, which is always going to be a material experiment where A interacts with B, that creates a reaction of C, and a mechanistic chain of events. That's the nature of science. There's no mysticism in science. There can only be material causes. Every single event has a material cause. I mean, this is the fundamental to science. So what you end up with is two competing modes of truth between religious orthodoxy claiming truth is God and Jesus and the Bible, and you got the secular scientific materialist world claiming truth is science. And so for the last 200 years, science has been winning in the court of public opinion, and scientific orthodoxy keeps being knocked down. The age of the earth being, only 6,000 years old, or Adam and Eve being our actual ancestors, or any number of different orthodox religious beliefs that you're supposed to believe literally from the Bible. Evolution, all this stuff. Science has been chipping away. And so every time the scientists chip away at their, at a religious orthodoxy, the scientist gains a little bit of more authority. They take away authority from these guys and they bring authority over here. And so we have a competition over authority. And so when you get to today, what we have is that in the, as it stands right now in academia, it's like, it's all science. And so if you're a secular liberal, basically, who believes that science is truth and you have a material worldview, they, as a presupposition, don't believe in any spirituality at all. And so they remove any notion of any spirituality, as a presupposition. And so we've got these two competing modes of truth, but these aren't the only two worldviews. And in my opinion, the scientists have some real problems with their perspective. And when, science is fine in the lab. I'm an educated guy. Science is great for engineering, but when you expound it to a complete philosophy and a cosmology and a worldview and a morality, it really starts to fall apart. And the secular humanists are having a lot of problems in their worldview these days. So I'm of the opinion that both sides are wrong and that both sides are basically leading into disaster. The additional wrinkle on the science side is postmodernism. So postmodernism gets introduced later. That's introduced in the 60s and 70s following the French philosophers Foucault and Derrida and these folks who introduced this idea that, that all of reality is really subjective. There is no truth and there is no objective truth. There is just, and you can shape reality with power and language. And so for the postmodernists, they're really dedicated to getting rid of all conventional notions of truth and reinventing the world completely from their own vision. And you see this in the transgender argument, the idea that just based on will alone, a man can be a woman. I support trans folks, but this is an absurd argument. Men are not women. Women are still women and men are still men. But it's a fundamentally postmodernist argument. You see the same thing in I won't go into all the politics at all. Two competing modes of truth. They're both wrong. But there's a new idea. There's a new idea out there. I mean, there's always been other ideas. There's always been mystical ideas. But a new bit of philosophy that I learned recently is this panpsychism. And this is an idea. It comes from Bertrand Russell, is the philosopher from around a century ago who first coined the phrase and coined this idea. But I learned about it from Rupert Sheldrake, and then he turned me on to Philip Goff, who's the academic these days who's written a couple of best-selling books, and he's really making the rounds talking about panpsychism. And you can find a ton of interviews with Philip Goff on YouTube and all over the place talking about all this idea. And he defends it as a academic discipline and a scientific discipline. And he's making quite a career for himself right now as a professional philosopher. So the idea with panpsychism is, and Bertrand Russell's great breakthrough was that he took this hard idea of consciousness that that has been plaguing science. So like in the world of science, consciousness is called the hard problem because the idea is that they believe that consciousness exists inside your brain, that consciousness derives from complex biological, complex biology, that it's a last point in the chain of events of complicated biology. The last point of evolution is that we arrive at consciousness, and that consciousness is something that exists inside your brain, between your ears, behind your eyes, and that somewhere inside your brain, if they just dissect it enough, they're going to find the magic combination of neurons and synapses and biochemistry that bring consciousness to life. But they haven't been able to do it. This has been what they're trying to do, and there's professors at Harvard right now that are fully committed to the project, cutting the brain into pieces until they find where consciousness comes from. This is a huge, huge issue in academia, and there's tons and tons of work going on consciousness right now. I won't even begin to go into all the different notions. But it comes back to this idea that, today's scientific materialists, they fundamentally believe, not only not believe in God, but no soul and no free will. And so they are trying to figure out all these things. But they cannot figure out consciousness, and it's really a problem. So what Bertrand Russell did was he flipped the problem on its head. He said, well, if we can't derive consciousness from matter, can we derive matter from consciousness? And that actually turns out to be a really good idea. It really actually works quite well, quite readily, because here's the reason. According to the scientists, all of the universe is reducible to math and physics. Everything ultimately comes down to mathematics, and everything that's real can be described with math. But math is not a human invention, but most importantly, math is not. It's not a material thing. Math itself is not material. And math itself is clearly the product of some kind of mind, some kind of consciousness made mathematics work in the first place. I can't explain it, but it's abundantly clear just from a perspective of common sense that if you're going to describe the world as pure mathematics, mathematics isn't material, and mathematics derives from some mind. So the implication of this is that consciousness is the fundamental substrate before matter, and that there is an underlying substrate of consciousness throughout the material universe, and that it's not that it's more matter. People try to shoot down this argument by saying that there's some new substance. It's not a new substance. It's just consciousness is pervasive. And so what this does is this harmonizes with traditional mysticism, and this harmonizes with traditional Indian, Hindu mysticism that have been saying this stuff for thousands of years, what they say is that exactly that. Consciousness is pervasive, the divine is consciousness, and that it's all the way through us, and there is no distinction between humans and God and between humans and one another, because we're all ultimately part of this same fractal consciousness. And it's pervasive throughout the universe. And it's pervasive at the state of particle physics. And it comes back to the idea of free will. And what it speaks is the idea that far from free will being an illusion, which is what the materialists say, they say no God, no soul, no free will, that far from being an illusion, that free will is actually, is part of consciousness. And so free will is pervasive. And I believe that this is fundamentally true, that how does evolution happen? How does the animals, we're told that it's just sort of rocks rolling downstream, and it's just all happening by mechanistic determinism. That's what the scientists say. But panpsychism would argue that no, there's an element of free will in evolution, that choices are being made, that at a level of elemental particle physics, choices are being made. Choices are being made between thriving and suffering. That if I go this way, we can combine in a way that's going to be better. And if we go this way, we're going to, deconstruct. And so at a particle level, there's learning happening, and there's choices happening, and there's invention and innovation and curiosity and an attempt to thrive. And that drives evolution, and that drives us, and that and the idea just is that consciousness is everywhere. And this is what mystics have been saying forever. And I really do believe that we're at this point, this inflection point in history, where we've got two competing ideologies of truth, and they're both wrong, and we need a new one. I feel like when I listen to an argument between Orthodox religious people and atheists, I feel like I'm listening to an argument between flat earthers and geocentrists, people who back in the time of Socrates in ancient Greece, they'd figured out that the earth was round because they'd gone sailing out in the ocean, and they determined, we're not on a flat earth, it's a round earth. But they still thought that the sun and all the planets were orbiting around the Earth, and the Earth was the center of the universe. They thought that for 2,000 years. It wasn't until the 1500s that, with Galileo and modern telescopes, that people determined, no, we're really orbiting around the sun. So, but for 2,000 years, people believed that even though they were correct in their arguments with the flat earthers, that the Earth wasn't flat, and that must have been a big brouhaha and a big dispute for centuries, people arguing over whether the Earth was really round or not, until finally the round earthers won out. But that dispute probably didn't happen overnight. But then pretty early on in the era of geocentrism, people were pointing out that the orbital patterns didn't line up, that like they were tracking the sun, tracking all the various planetary bodies, and they were recognizing that if everything's circling around the Earth, the orbital pattern should be one way, but they weren't. There was something else, and that suggests that maybe we're orbiting around the sun. But nobody wanted to believe that for a long time, and the dissenters could never prove that opinion, even though they were correct. So the geocentrists actually came up with this kludge. Ptolemaic astronomy was one where he came out, he threw an extra little circle into the orbital patterns to try and do this error correction, but even he knew it didn't actually work, because it didn't work for the moon. But still, they persisted for 1,500 years, 2,000 years, in insisting that the authorities of truth, the Catholic Church and the scientific authorities, insisted for centuries upon centuries that no, we were orbiting around, that the sun is orbiting around us. And that was heresy and blasphemy to say otherwise. And if you point out the fallacy, the scientific fallacy that, if you tried to launch a rocket, they would have to the moon, they never could have done it. Even though critics were pointing out the fallacies, the authorities wouldn't hear it. And so I feel like we're in the same kind of thing right now, where we've got flat earthers and geocentrists arguing with one another about who's right, but actually they're both right. And we need to figure out who the heliocentrists are today. And that the next step is for physics and mysticism to come together, for the scientists to drop their arrogant pretension that there is no truth to mysticism, and that, we shed all the old orthodoxy that's from the Iron Age, recognize that we've gone through the looking glass of civilization into the space age, and we need to figure out something new. But where physics and mysticism can come together, that I think is going to be the next great breakthrough in science and in spirituality. And the conversations about the mother sort of open that up. But I'll halt there. I've been kind of rambling. I don't know if you got any questions there, Jacob.
So if both sides of the philosophical table are wrong, what kind of combined or new philosophy would you suggest?
Well, something that recognizes that consciousness is pervasive. It's like this dispute's already been out there for a while. So when you talk about quantum mechanics, this is another one of the problems scientists have, is that they can't rectify quantum mechanics with Newtonian, Einstein, general relativity. They can't square those two. But all the guys who invented quantum mechanics, like Schrodinger and Max Planck and these other guys, Schrodinger in particular was a total devotee of Hindu mysticism. And for him, the Upanishads, which is a sacred text from India, were totally talking all about quantum mechanics. And he was trying to tell everybody that he knew. Nobody would listen to him. Schrodinger's running around being like, all this quantum mechanics is right here in the Upanishads. And if you go to India, they're like, yeah, of course. Like they don't have, like in India, there is no problem between science and mysticism. They're totally mystical society, and they do plenty of good science, and there is no contradiction whatsoever, because there is no contradiction between mysticism and science. It's the scientists here in the West that are dismiss mysticism, but they're accustomed to arguing with old-fashioned orthodoxy. It's the old-fashioned orthodoxy doesn't like mysticism either. The old Christian orthodoxy does not like mysticism, even though there's loads of mysticism in Christian traditions, and special people, prophets and holy men, they get to be mystical, but they don't want the general public being mystical. Like the Christian orthodoxy is very much about controlling the mystical experience and channeling it through the priesthood. So the priesthood in the church can be the intermediary, and so they gain authority by being the intermediary to God. They don't want you being mystical. Like that's why they don't like psychedelic drugs, because that brings out the mystical side of life. And so for the church, that's a total threat to their authority. So they don't like mysticism, and the church doesn't like science. They don't like anything that challenges their authority. But, that's yesterday's news. Well, except for the fact that they have political power, and, they want to lead us to an apocalyptic war in the Middle East, over Jerusalem, which I'm pretty sure they're going to get it because they want it. So there's that problem with orthodoxy, is like apocalyptic war. And the problem with scientists is that they have all that power in government, and they keep leading us into one disaster after another. Whether it was COVID, the COVID response, and I don't care what your opinions on COVID are, the governmental response was a disaster. And the governmental action on climate change and renewable energy, which is my profession, I make my living doing solar power, is also going to be a total fiasco and totally going to crash and burn. And these folks just keep getting it wrong, getting it wrong, getting it wrong. They're getting it wrong in our foreign policy. They have postmodernist foreign policy. They just act like they're just completely delusional. And so they're getting us in all these terrible wars. So I think that, no, there's going to be this huge breakthrough when there's going to be a revolution in Western science, when they finally admit that consciousness is not inside the brain, it's outside the brain. And that what the mystics have been saying for thousands and thousands of years, and what loads and loads of people in the West currently believe, these are not new ideas. These are not unusual ideas. The idea that quantum mechanics and consciousness, Deepak Chopra has built an entire career, an entire empire out of this kernel of truth about quantum mechanics and consciousness being, somehow related. And he's spun an entire empire out of it, publishing empire out of it. So, I think there's going to be, and I'm not a Deepak Chopra acolyte, I'm just saying that there is a connection there between consciousness and quantum mechanics, that when the scientists finally admit it, it's going to be a huge, huge breakthrough.
So if this is the case, that consciousness is connected to quantum mechanics, what are the implications of that exactly?
Quantum mechanics is totally above my pay grade. I barely understand it. I just know it works. They're able to use it to build machines. We built lasers and MRI machines, and now they've got quantum computing coming. We are in a really crazy moment in human history, where we have, we were living in the Iron Age. We lived in the Bronze Age, went through the Neolithic, and then at 4000 BC, we went into the Bronze Age. We were into the Bronze Age until 1000 BC, we entered the Iron Age. We've been in the Iron Age since then, all the way up until the founding fathers of America, right up until the Industrial Revolution. The material world really didn't change from the time of the Roman Empire to the time of George Washington, which is why they had the same model for an economy built on slavery, because they saw the world in the same basic way as the Romans did. But with the Industrial Revolution, and then the digital revolution we're in now, that has facilitated all this change. And so the old structures are breaking down, but we don't even know what's coming next. We don't know. The rate of change just keeps accelerating. And so the next step of technology, when you combine quantum computing with artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, holographic data storage, we have no idea what's coming next. And so, and nobody can say, so we got to hold on to, that things that really work, and be ready to shed the things that don't work. But but truths that have been around for thousands of years usually have something about them that are worth holding on to. So that's my kind of default position. And so, but I couldn't even begin to explain what is coming technically. I don't think anybody does. Who saw, all this AI that's coming? I don't know. I'm just rambling.
Let me see if there's any questions in the chat. Doesn't seem to be any so far. So do you think that this revolutionary change that you're talking about, do you think that's going to happen soon, or do you think we're a long ways from that?
Oh no, we're living history right now. Things are happening I mean, in terms of world events all around us right now, I mean, but I think this entire century, I think the entire 21st century will probably be pretty dramatic, historically speaking. And so, yeah, no, I think we're like poised for just this massive crisis and a civil war in the United States, frankly. I think there's just the culture war is no joke. And the right wing is way more organized than the left wing, and because they have the churches and such. And yeah, I think they're going to revolt. I really do believe that this war in the Middle East that's going on right now in Israel, the toothpaste is not going back in the tube. That this is going to fracture like the Democrat left wing politics in this country, and it's going to unite the right. And so the right's going to win the presidential election. And so if you are the type of person that thinks fighting a war over the third temple is a good idea, and you have that, that's your perspective in life, and there's a lot of people who believe that, Israel is mostly a Christian Zionist enterprise more than it is a Jewish Zionist enterprise. Those guys have been wanting this war for a long time, and they've been working for this war for a long time, and I think they'll get it. I think the Islamic community has no intent at all to let Israel survive as a country. And I think Israel is in a position where it's kill or be killed. And so they're killing. And that is going to already is just creating complete and total outrage around the entire world, justifiably so. But what are you going to do if you're Israeli? Like, the Muslims want them dead. And so, and then politically speaking, they recognize that the right wingers recognize that this is fracturing the left. So they have no intention to stop. If you're in the Lindsey Graham, John Bolton side of things, and you think a war with Iran is a good idea, like, this is the best chance they've had. And if you think building a third temple, blowing up the Al-Aqsa Mosque and building a third temple, like, you're not going to get a better chance than the events that are playing out right now. Like, there isn't going to be a better chance. Like, they're going to do it. Like, I just have no doubt in my mind at all right now that somebody, and I have no idea who, but somebody's going to make a move on the Temple Mount, and all hell's going to break loose, man. And who the fuck knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I have no idea. I want to be on the side of the folks that survive. I want to be on the side of the heliocentrists that are just trying to make sense of things, that do believe in God. I mean, I believe in God, but I also believe in the Mother of God. I mean, that's what my book is all about. That's what my work is all about with the goddess in the Bible, is that, we need to open up the conversation. We need to broaden the conversation. That's why I like talking about the Mother. It's not about worshiping her. It's just about recognizing the historical existence of these religions. It's about recognizing what we can learn from them and try and build a new ideology and a new program, because, the folks who want Father alone, they're going to get their war. And the folks who think no God at all are going to lead us into disaster. They already have. And so we need something new has got to come along, a new ideology. I mean, that's what I'm trying to be a part of.
So what you're saying is that people that want an opportunity to take advantage of what's going on to create more chaos, is that basically what you're saying?
Sure. There's definitely loads of people who would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. And they would perfectly happy to blow everything up so they can be the last one standing and they can be in charge of the wreckage. Human beings have been doing this for a long time. And I mean, people do this a lot. And it's so yes, I absolutely believe that in terms of what's going on in Jerusalem specifically, yeah, I just think this is all like sort of very eschatological stuff. It's like, this is the third nation of Israel. The first two nations of Israel only lasted roughly 80 years apiece, and this one just turned 75. Like, 5 more years from now, like, Israel might not exist either. So, if you're a part of the Islamic Arab community and you want to get rid of Israel, this is your chance to do it. And if you're a part of the Zionist community that wants to blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque, now's going to be your chance to do it. Like, this is everybody that wants these big fights. Like, now's their chance. Like, I don't want any of these fights. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't want it. Most of the people don't want it. Like, 90% of humanity doesn't want these fights, but 98% of humanity doesn't want it. But there are people that do. So yes, I think people are absolutely going to take advantage of it. We'll wake up to surprise news.
So this chaos that you think might be coming, do you think it's going to be like a worldwide disaster, or you don't think everybody's going to be affected by it?
Oh, I'm not making predictions about, like, I don't want to get over my skis. I'm making too many predictions about, like, I don't know. I do think there's going to be political crisis in the United States. That's only growing, and that there's going to be a big ass war in the Middle East, and problems elsewhere. But I'm not gonna, like, I don't want to. I'm not making prophetic predictions here. I'm just trying to, like, you just play out the current chain of events and see where they're heading, and see what ideologies are driving the actors. But yeah, I think that, like, in terms of political crisis in the United States, I think the left keeps pushing these crazy positions so hard that the right wing is gonna revolt. Like, they're really pissed about COVID. Like, liberals are like, oh, COVID, they're so mad about that. It's yesterday that's they want to memory hold COVID. Like, meanwhile, on the right wing, people are absolutely furious that schools were shut down, or they got thrown out of their jobs, or they were forced to take vaccines that they didn't want to take, or they had injuries that they said they weren't going to happen. They're absolutely livid on the right. They're livid about transgender stuff. They're livid about the renewable energy stuff. And then the liberals just keep getting shit wrong. Like, they're going to lose this war in Russia. Like, it's going to be this absolute, like Ukraine, it's going to be this absolute disaster of a war. And it was a war that never needed to happen, because it was a war that NATO provoked by trying to get Ukraine into NATO. Like, if they hadn't tried to get in Ukraine into NATO, there never would have been a war. And it's going to end up with, Ukraine destroyed, and, Russia victorious, and egg on the face of everybody that supported it in the West. I don't know. It's just, we're talking politics. We're just supposed to be talking philosophy. But yeah, I just think there's, like, we just one political crisis after another, and, like, the system can only take so much before it breaks.
Let me see here. And there doesn't seem to be any questions in the chat so far. Oh, we have a question. Brett, thank you for your super chat. Can you please expand on matter coming from consciousness? Do any physicists speak right on it?
Yes, thank you very much for bringing us back on topic here. Yeah, so though there's loads and loads of literature on this. I mean, this is an entire very, very deep philosophical issue. And so there is, I'm not an expert on it. I'm not a professional in this study, but Philip Goff is the guy I was mentioning, and this has been a raging debate in the current like academic philosophy world. There's a theory that came out called what do they call it? IIT, Integrated Information Theory, that is trying to harmonize some of this stuff, trying to come up with ideas that present, like, I don't want to mischaracterize it, but I think what they're saying is that, like, information is this underlying substrate. And so, but it became very controversial because it's got a certain following, and then a whole set of, just kind of a brouhaha just lately, a whole set of professional academics published an article or something denouncing it as pseudoscience, and trying to say that the whole idea of IIT, which is a parallel notion of panpsychism, some overlap, is just pseudoscience, and it should be pushed out of academia. Which has been this whole idea of shutting down conversations in academia is a bad trend. So yeah, no, this is the idea of matter and consciousness is super raging right now in the philosophical world. And I highly recommend you take a look at Philip Goff. He had some interesting, Sabine Hassenfelder is a prominent physicist on YouTube. She's a academic, so she's got a big YouTube following. She had a debate with Philip Goff just lately over this stuff, and she's poo-pooing it and shooting it down, but she keeps coming back to this idea that the panpsychists are suggesting there's some new element that needs to be And that's not what Goff is saying. That's not what the panpsychists are saying. They're not saying that there's some new, element to the elemental table of part of matter. It's just saying that that free will, like the capacity to have an experience and learn from it, is lying there at the level of particle physics. Like the way I see it in my mind is that, and I'm not a physicist or a professional philosopher, is that we need a new variable for particle physics for free will. They introduced dark matter as a variable to make the equations balance in space physics, astrophysics. But dark matter is just totally a fiction. Like they just made up dark matter. Like nobody knows what dark matter is. If they just it makes the equations work, so it must be there, but no one knows what it is. Well, why not? Why can't we do the same thing with free will? Why we can't make another equation, call it an I or something, and have a new variable? Because there's a lot of stuff that physics doesn't resolve. Like they don't resolve randomness. Like everything's supposed to be determinative, except that there's a certain amount of randomness that is just there in the systems as well. Well, maybe that randomness isn't actually random. Maybe that randomness is choices being made that at the particle level, that atoms are making choices. I don't know. I'm kind of making conjectures here. Stuff's a little bit above my pay grade. I'm kind of like a mysticism 101 guy. But really just but the way I see it is that free will and choices are being made all the way down the stack to the level at the most base matter. And when the universe at the time of the Big Bang was completely unformed chaos, there was a mind at work. And there was, not to say one singular mind, maybe it's one singular mind with a fractal. That's the way I see it. But there is consciousness at work, is the guiding the way things came together. They didn't just come together because of pre-written laws. Like the particles themselves figured out, like, oh, if we come together this way, we can become a sun, or if we come together this way, we become, a planet or whatever. And some formulations were stable and they worked, and some formulations were not stable and they didn't work, and so the things fell apart. And the ones that were stable are the ones that stuck around for a long time. So yeah, I think that this really needs to be reincorporated into our model of the Big Bang cosmology and evolution, that that spirit animates the matter, and that ideology animates people more than material goods do. So a Marxist view of history is that everything is just done for material terms. But no, people have souls, people have beliefs, they have ideologies that drive them and that are more important than money. And you see this all the time. And so spirit animates the matter. There is spirit underlying the matter. And it's not just a material universe. There is more going on than just material.
So do you think that from that mind that you were talking about at the beginning, do you equate that with the origin of the understanding of God or a creator?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's God. I mean, that's God. I mean, it lies beyond our comprehension, our understanding. We can only make conjecture and guesswork to try and understand the nature of God. But yeah, that mind, 100%, that's God. And then that unformed chaos, that's the mother. That's the Shakti. That's the material world that becomes the living, breathing, organic mother. And so one thing about mother and father and the cosmology I have is that, and this is totally Hindu cosmology, is that the father is immaterial, but the mother is material. So hold on. Let's see. Can you see this? This is, all right. Whoa. All right. Let's see if I can get it focused. So I'll take the serpent off. It's a new camera. I'm still figuring out how it flicks to focus. At any rate, this is a lingam. This is a Hindu. It's not in focus, unfortunately. This is a Hindu lingam and yoni. So this is the lingam. And what this is it's a phallic stone. And then this is the yoni, which is the female phallic stone. And this is like oldest religious object in history. Like these things go back to like what is it? The Indus River Valley, the old Indian. These things are like 5,000 years old. Not this one, obviously, but I got this one in India last year. And so what this represents, they use this in Shiva worship, and these things have been used continually for thousands and thousands of years. I don't really know what the original date is, but this represents Shiva. This represents, or the father, the male principle, that the immaterial, the idea. And then this is Shakti. This is and what Shakti is in Hindu traditions is that source chaos, what the seas, the saltwater seas for the Mesopotamians, the primordial mother out of which everything was born. And so the mother comes first, and then the father is born out of the mother. But the father is that mind. And so the father takes that primordial chaos and shapes it. But it's imbued with the spirit of the mother. So the mother and father come together to create the totality of the universe. And so in Hindu cosmology, the father is the immaterial and the mother is the material. And so that's the way I see it. Like the mother is the living, breathing earth, which you can touch and like taste and like, put your hands on, and of which our physical flesh was born from and returns to in death. And whereas the Heavenly Father, that's the earthly mother, and the Heavenly Father is you can't touch him. Like it's immaterial. It's effervescent. It's you can't touch him. So but it's the mind, and that mind, there's a universal mind, and then I see it as like one big fractal where all of the little mind that's in your head and my head is derived from that source mind. Musicians talk this way too. When they talk about writing a song, they talk about a melody. They didn't invent the melody. They tune it in. They pluck it out of the air. Like it comes from the atmosphere, and their guitar is just an antenna. Like I think that's the same thing with our mind. Our mind is more of an antenna with a little flesh brain computer attached to it. But it's we're tuning in this universal consciousness. We're not like it doesn't come from within our flesh. It's external to our flesh. And there's a lot of science on this, near-death experiences and telepathy. It's a lot of stuff that material science rejects as BS, like any kind of psychic behavior or telepathy. Actually, I think there's a lot of truth to it. I've witnessed, psychic behavior. So yeah, like I don't know. Back to you, Jacob.
So, if consciousness originates outside of the brain, which theory do you follow for the explanation of for the origins of consciousness?
Not the Richard Dawkins one. I think that it's I don't think there is an origin to consciousness. I think it's always been there, and that there's clearly something different about people compared to other animals, in terms of the way our ability to speak and communicate. But and I don't know what caused that. I have no idea. Clearly it's clearly happened, but my real issue is with the current crop of philosophers who say there's no free will. Like that's one that really gets under my skin, because this is a really prominent view these days. Steven Pinker, Robert Sapolsky, Yuval Noah Harari. I'm getting his name wrong. All these guys really prominent, coming out of Harvard and top schools. They all argue very strongly, no free will. Sam Harris takes this position. All like, the four horsemen of atheism, they're all very firm in this. Decker, he's another philosopher, Dan Decker. And they're arguing that, free will is an illusion, and that we're, our thoughts are deterministic from any number of, complex influences that we have from our past, our genetics and our history and our trauma and our nutrition and yada, yada, yada. But there is no spark inside. It's purely external. I just don't believe this. I didn't believe it when I was in college, when I was an undergraduate. I got in this big argument with a psychology professor, and I was arguing, no, people have souls. There is a spark inside. But all these prominent philosophers these days, all of them are postmodernists, and they all come from our top schools. They all say the same thing, where no God, no soul, no free will. And they don't acknowledge that there's a spark at the heart of the equations. Anyway, what's his name who wrote the Brief History of Time? Stephen Hawking. He talks about how the all the equations of physics, all they tell you is how things happen. They don't tell you why. They don't tell you what was the spark that started them all off. And that's exactly the question. What is the spark at the heart of the equations? And so, yeah, I think it's free will. I think it's pervasive all the way down the stack.
So there's no questions in the chat so far.
Is anyone even listening? How many people are on it?
Yeah, there's people listening.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is not my usual material, so I'm kind of just riffing here. I don't have anything prepared. And I came across this idea from Philip Goff, and I only just got turned on to Philip Goff just recently, maybe a month or two ago. And so, but this idea just blew my mind. Bertrand Russell's little proof, it's just a little bit of rhetoric. It's just a little bit of logical proof. Does consciousness arrive from matter or matter arrive from consciousness? No one's been able to make consciousness arrive from matter. And if the scientists can do it, then they win. If the guys at Harvard can figure it out, if they can unlock it, where in the brain the consciousness arrives from, then they win. Then their authority is granted. But if they can't win, if they can't prove it, that means the mystics are right, and the mystics need some authority. And you have to get some authority over there. And we don't have to just listen to the scientists all the time. Because frankly, I've lost faith in our scientific establishment. I've just completely lost faith in them. I don't trust them or their worldview.
Here's an interesting question. Zyctomorph says, will computers achieve self-awareness in the next 10 years?
Interesting question, and I could only speculate. Depends on how you describe self-awareness. But I will say, I kind of fear and expect maybe that self-aware, intelligence, like genuine, synthetic intelligence, or even a synthetic soul, might be way easier to come up with than, they might not ever figure out how to consciousness arrives from matter, but they might figure out how to build a machine that does what our brain does and come up with consciousness from a purely synthetic substrate, material substrate. And that but it still tunes in that universal consciousness and becomes, whether you want to, I don't actually think self-awareness and consciousness are the same thing. I think you can I don't think elemental consciousness is free will. Elemental consciousness has self-awareness. So I want to make that clear. But free will, in the sense that you learn what makes you thrive and you learn what makes you suffer, and you choose to thrive. And so you make choices that will allow you to thrive. I think it may be way easier to get to that point in AI. And that we achieve self-aware, call it self-aware robotics. It'll be like that. It'll be like one day they'll wake up and they'll figure it out. Oh, we built this little device and it makes all our technologies, appliances conscious. And that we're into Star Wars and, R2-D2, C-3PO, it could just be a breakthrough, like radio and television, or just these breakthroughs. There was never radio, and then one day there was radio, and there was never television, and one day there was television. There was never self-aware robots, then one day there was self-aware robots. And I think that could literally happen anytime, or it might not happen at all. But I kind of suspect, my gut intuition on that is that it'll just be a breakthrough one day, and that we'll be able to it'll just become this plug-in module. It's not the same as AI. It'll just be something more like. So a side point, Roger Penrose is a very prominent physicist who's been talking about consciousness and from a physics perspective. And he's made this suggestion that these we've got these microtubules that biologists know about in our brains, are like these really nano structures, that those little tubes, and people don't really know what they're for. But Penrose made the suggestion that maybe that has to do with consciousness, and maybe they're like an antenna, or maybe I'm saying that, like maybe those microtubules are like an antenna that help us tune in consciousness. So perhaps there's some device that they could build, a microtubule like that, and plug it into our technology. I'm just making that up. That's science fiction, but something like that, something to that effect, that like it'll just be a breakthrough, and then all of a sudden we've got R2D2s and C3POs running around. Star Trek.
Rochester Johnny says Star Trek is better.
I'm a Star Wars guy myself, but with all the recent, not counting the recent stuff.
Oh, he said Star Trek, but
was I saying Star Trek? I meant to say Star Wars.
You said Star Wars.
Yeah, no, I like Star Wars. I was always more of a Star Wars guy myself, but Trek is cool. Star Trek is cool. I like sci-fi, all of it.
Let's see here. Examusic says as soon as computers have a central nervous system connected to their brain.
I think they already are. They basically are a brain already, aren't they? Isn't that what I've always thought of computers as little, like, just for years, I worked in computers for a long time. So like for me, the brain is one part radio, one part computer. And so plus a soul, we'll probably come up with synthetic life here before too long, like Blade Runner, something like that.
Now Brett says transhumanism into robots.
I think a certain amount of that is totally inevitable, and we have to be really careful about how we approach it, because this gets into the whole like sort of transgenderism thing. And are we aiming for an androgynous society? Because I personally don't want an androgynous society. I'm all for trans people doing their thing, but I don't actually think androgyny should be the goal, or like breeding humans in test tube factories should be the goal either. Although I think people will probably sign up for that. So yeah, I think it's sort of about transhumanism into robots and into technology. It's part of like this craziness that we're going through that I was talking about earlier, like that as our technology develops, like nobody knows, like nobody can say what's coming. And so a certain amount of this integration with our tech is probably inevitable.
So my closing question, do you see in the physicist side and science side of academia and neurological side, is there a slow growth of support for the idea that consciousness originates outside the brain?
Well, the view has always been there, so it's not a new view, and it's definitely growing. I mean, if you look at what Philip Goff is the attention he's getting and the traction he's getting, it's clearly because people recognize that consciousness is a real problem. I mean, they call it the hard problem for a reason. It's it's a huge field of academic study, and yeah, I think the panpsychist related folks are definitely gaining a lot of traction.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Ed Dodge.
Well, thank you, Jacob. It's been great to have you. It's great to be here with you.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.